Hello, I am attorney Masa Sam Foray. I am founder of the Foray firm with offices in Chicago and in Houston, and I am back again to talk to you about all things related to immigration. So today's question is, I am the victim of human trafficking. What rights do I have? So the good news is that you do have rights and you do have a pathway to lawful residency and lawful citizenship in the United States if you came here as a human trafficking victim. So to take it back to give you the history of, legislature legislation surrounding human trafficking, just note that in about 2002, so approximately just a little less than 20 years ago, the U.S. government identified that human trafficking was a serious issue in the United States. In fact, they identified that approximately 50,000 victims were trafficked here every year. 50,000 victims brought to the United States for human trafficking purposes. And from that identified issue and that identified need was born the T visa. So what is a T visa? So the T visa is a visa that is specially formulated for human trafficking victims. Nevertheless, just note that although about 50,000 victims are trafficked here per year, only 5,000 T visas are made available to human trafficking victims. And so there's a lot of work that remains. So because there is only 5,000 visas available for 50,000 victims, let's talk about what the requirements are and the elements that need to be met by a human trafficking victim who wants to avail themselves of the relief of having a T visa. So first and foremost, you have to establish that you came to the U.S. illegally for sex work or for slavery. All right? You actually have to be the victim of trafficking, that you came here illegally for the purposes of sex work or slavery. Number two, that you did commit a sex act, and that sex act was committed by fraud or by coercion or by force. Number three, you have to establish that you would experience extreme hardship or difficulty if you were deported. Many times human trafficking victims report that not only are their own lives threatened, but the lives of their family back home are also threatened if they were to go to the authorities. And so you have to establish that the sex acts that you were forced to commit once you arrived in the United States, or the slavery that you were forced to endure when you arrived to the United States, was done so by fraud and by coercion, and that you would experience extreme hardship if you were deported back to your country. Number four, and this is a really important one and quite controversial, you have to establish that you have been cooperative and reported the crime to the authorities. And not only do you have to establish that you have been cooperative and that you have reported the crime to the authorities, but if you are over the age of 15, you also are expected to assist the authorities in prosecution of the traffickers. So think about that. What would it mean to assist authorities in the prosecution of traffickers? That might mean that you have to work with the U.S. attorney or the federal prosecutor who is prosecuting your offender. Obviously, again, many trafficking victims say that the reason why they were so well controlled by their abusers is because of the threat of harm and death, not only to them, but the threats of harm and death to their family members. And so you can imagine that this is a very controversial requirement, because although it helps the state make the case against the human traffickers, it can expose victims to, continued and ongoing harm and even death in some circumstances. So there is an exception for this. If you can prove that, there is a trauma to you, an undue trauma, an unusual trauma, or you can establish that, your life would, seriously be in an imminent danger if you were to cooperate with the authorities, then you might be able to meet one of the exceptions to this particular rule. And then lastly, you have to show an endorsement by local law enforcement authorities to show that you did make a complaint or file a police report, and then you need to submit that secondary evidence. So that police report or that letter from the law enforcement agency to whom you made your outcry. So again, T visas are not available to everybody, but they are a necessary tool in fighting, human trafficking in the U.S. And so if you are somebody who qualifies for one of these, we strongly encourage you to cooperate with the authorities, and also to seek the advice and counsel of an immigration attorney that you know and you trust.